today, I have Ravi Bhatiani, who's the Executive Director for FETSA, who represents the bulk liquid storage sector in Europe. Ravi has also been shortlisted for the Rising Star category at the Global Tank Storage Awards. So Ravi, welcome. Please can you start us off by telling us a little bit about who FETSA are and what FETSA actually does?
Thanks, Margaret. Good morning, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with you today. So FETSA is a European trade body, and that means we represent the interests of the sector towards international organizations, the European Union, European Commission, European Parliament, the member states, and so on that make up the EU. And as well, we represent our sector vis-a-vis the International Energy Agency, the OECD, and so on. And we have a lot of economic weight behind us. We represent, through our members, 1 billion tons of yearly throughput. We have over 100 million cubic meters of storage capacity, and we have 743 terminals across Europe behind FETSA.
Okay, thank you. And so this week in the news, there have been several reports of cyber attacks on storage terminals across Europe. How big of a concern is that to your members?
Cybersecurity is really a top concern amongst our members because the cargoes that we are importing and the cargoes that we're storing, they tend to be hazardous liquids. And so we need very strong safety mechanisms and very resilient safety mechanisms to transport, to store these goods in a safe manner. And whenever you have a threat that could impact safety, we have to take it extremely seriously. And we have each company has its own ways to mitigate these risks, and they're advised, I'm sure, by national governments as well as to how to do it with the current volatile global environment.
Yes, of course. Okay. Thank you. And apart from cybersecurity, what are the other biggest threats that are affecting your members at the moment?
And we have a lot. Yeah, we have a lot of challenges in 2022. So firstly, we have a very uncertain global environment. This impacts trade a lot. The less trade you have, the less movements you have going in and out of terminals, and less throughput and so on. We also have energy price volatility that is a consequence of the uncertain global environment. Storage is really a buffer for volatile times, but at the same time, operations in the terminals have to adapt quickly to the various trading scenarios that we are impacted by. For example, contango, 1 month backwardation, another month it can change very quickly in the light of this volatility. And the global situation also causes a rather inconsistent set of policy making. So this is quite important for us because we need legal certainty and policy certainty as we're going through the energy transition. If policy making is inconsistent, preferring electrification one day, nuclear and gas another day, hydrogen another day, how can we make sound investment decisions? So we need consistent policy making.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then in terms of the energy transition, so how much of a challenge is it for your members to maintain safe operations with their current infrastructure and at the same time prepare and invest in future infrastructure?
It's a very topical issue because clearly investments are incentivized towards preparing for future energy carriers and meeting the 2030 and 2050 legally binding climate goals that the European Union has. So this can cause some kind of a market failure, in fact, where we have certain liquids, traditional legacy liquids that we're storing today, but a lack of incentive almost to invest in those facilities. So this is where public support and state aid as we move through the energy transition will come in, because you need a public intervention if you are in a situation of market failure. Given that the legacy liquids are likely to probably peak and then plateau around 2030 or 2030 to 2040 for oil products, there'll probably still be an investment case in that time period, but it's more and more difficult to attract external capital for more polluting products.
Okay. And how much do you expect the sector to invest in future fuels infrastructure?
According to our latest statistics gathered over the last year, 5.7 billion euros is the investment figure for our sector over the next 5 years. And this figure covers infrastructure upgrades. It also covers things like safety adaptation to change to new types of firefighting foams, more environmentally friendly foams. It covers cybersecurity, climate change adaptation, and so on.
Okay. And last year, FETSA worked on a study with Trinomics looking at adapting current infrastructure to future liquids. What have been the impacts of the results of this study?
So I think this really highlights the think tank role of FETSA, because a trade association is more than just a lobby group. We got a lot of interest from key suppliers to our sector, because these kind of studies show the needs of our terminals as we look ahead to 2030 is the first deadline, so to speak. And we also had a lot of visibility vis-a-vis the European Commission, who are extremely interested to see if our scenarios match their own scenarios and whether or not they need to adapt their own scenarios in light of the changes that we are forecasting. So it helped FETSA, it helped our sector, it helped our suppliers, and it led to a wish amongst our members to do more research. And we're currently doing some research on the state of tank storage today in 2030 and looking ahead to 2050 with the Hague Center for Strategic Studies as a follow-up.
Okay. And I mean, it's quite clear that the pandemic has accelerated the energy transition. What do you think the sector is going to look like in 2030?
It's difficult to predict 2030 and 2050, but there's some key trends. So, for example, automation is a trend. I think reducing even more emissions from our installations is a trend. Complying with zero pollution rules in terms of contamination of water, soil, of air, and here what is relevant is firefighting foam. So changing firefighting foams is a trend. Increasing cybersecurity, again, the more automation you have, the more cyber risk you have. And I think that the way that terminals look to you and I may change as well, because we're going to be storing perhaps less oil products and more future energy carriers, which might require, for example, smaller tanks, a more diverse range of tanks that look completely different if it's liquefied gas like LNG. So I think visually we'll see changes, but also in the operations you will see a lot of changes.
Yeah, agreed. And what is FETSA doing to help its members future-proof the sector?
It's difficult to future-proof the sector, but what we're trying to do is to make sure that the policy outlook is relatively certain and the trajectory is certain. So when the European Commission is building its scenarios for how to achieve the energy transition in 2030, 2050, probably 2040 as well, we will lend our expertise in terms of what the needs are for storage in terms of building new facilities, what the kind of investments are that are involved, and so on. So if the European Commission and other international organizations know about the important role of storage, what we can store, how we can contribute to the energy transition, then policy will be made that essentially enables us to keep operating as the buffer that I've mentioned before.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And you mentioned in an article that you wrote in the last edition of Tank Storage magazine about compulsory stocks and the importance of governments updating the compulsory stocks to include future fuels. How important do you think that is?
Is incredibly important because we see the role of tank storage as a buffer, and we see what's happening in areas where there are no strategic stocks, or at least very few strategic stocks, like gas and LNG today. It's leading to high inflation, higher cost of living, lower living standards, no autonomy in foreign policy from the EU, and so on. So if we are thinking in advance, what are going to be the economic levers of the future to replace crude oil, gas, LNG, and so on, we have to start thinking about strategic storage of these, and it can be critical inputs into the chemical sector, into the healthcare sector, as well as the energy sector. So we're not just thinking about strategic stocks of hydrogen or hydrogen carriers, but much more broadly, for example, of recycled materials that will be used as plastic feedstocks in the future in the circular economy. So it's highly important to create this economic buffer for times of crisis.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. I know that we'll be hearing more from you at Stock Expo later in the year in May. So until then, thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret.